If we could just welcome Nick to the stage, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. Testing. To carry on the Olympics analogy, this feels a little bit like a baton in the Olympics. As Martin said, my name is Nick Green. I'm here to talk to you about how I apply NLP tools and techniques in the world of outdoor education. Some outdoor education occurring. I have had a varied career. Started off in the water sports industry, moved into business when I realised that there wasn't a huge amount of money to be made in the water sports industry. Ended up managing training departments, most recently for Imaris, which I'm sure some of you will be familiar with. I was managing the learning and development section for them here in St Austell. And then I went self-employed, which was partly Martin's fault, as a result of a well-formed outcome session that I had probably about 8 years ago. So the reason I'm stood here now, I have Martin to thank or to blame. We're not sure how. I'll tell you at the end whether it's thank or blame. And then, I'd say about 3-4 years ago, I went self-employed. And I filter for difference in my life. I like variety. I've got a low boredom threshold, some might say. And I wanted to do some management and leadership training, but also work in outdoor education as well. And I've got other business interests that fill up the rest of my time that I don't have. So there's 2 questions that I want to pose, really, and these are the questions that I'm going to answer, which is firstly, why outdoor education? Because I think I need to contextualize what it's about. Then I'm going to go on to ask why NLP tools specifically work in that field. The majority of the work that I do is working with primary school-aged children. And we work with adults and we work with other ages, but I want to talk specifically about primary school-aged children, and also more specifically again about some of the pupils who demonstrate some quite challenging behaviour. We work with a range of schools, of course, from sort of prep schools at one end of the social demographic, right the way down to inner city schools. And we work with special schools where if you're excluded from a primary school in the Devon area, you end up at this school. It's last chance saloon. There's nowhere else to go. Most of these children lead have very chaotic family lives. There's lots of other autism, attention deficit disorder issues as well. So they're really challenging. And I'm going to be talking a lot about how I work with them. Just to put into context how outdoor education works, there's this theory called the adventure wave, which is really simple. You brief an activity, so you prepare them for what they're going to do. You have the activity, and you need to do that in a way that the sensory stimulus is appropriate. Yeah? You don't want them to get too excited or too scared or too anxious, because they won't do it. Yeah, they sort of fall straight off the edge and performance drops. And then you have a stage of debriefing. And it's the briefing and the debriefing stages that I think NLP enables me to really get good results. Because in the world of outdoor education, most people went into it because they were good at a particular activity, be it climbing, kayaking, hang gliding, windsurfing. They were good at an activity, and they're kind of using that to continue that lifestyle. I approached it slightly differently as an educator. And what NLP gives me is the tools and techniques and the skills to brief effectively and to enable the pupils to reflect and unpick the learning that they've just experienced. And I'm going to talk about that a bit later on. I'm going to introduce a model that I hope some of you will be familiar with very quickly. Neurological Levels of Change by Robert Dilts, which is looking at change, essentially. Now, I believe learning to be change. When we learn, we change, we become different in some way, and we behave differently as a result. It's often represented as this triangle, this hierarchy, in the, if you change something at the top, it'll cascade down through to the bottom, but won't necessarily move from the bottom up. Does that make sense? You might be familiar. It's easiest to adapt behavior. Most interventions go at behavior, the nagging, I call it. Don't do that, do this instead. Limited effect. I prefer to see the model as a flatter structure whereby each of the different areas can affect each other. A quick example of that, this school I was talking about, this special school, we we go into their school premises and work with them in school. And it's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. It's really tough going. They don't focus, they're not motivated. There's constant low levels of disruption, which occasionally breaks into violence between them. You know, this school, they've got a padded cell in the school where they have to put pupils. All the staff are trained in restraint techniques. Because we're talking about, 10, 11-year-old children, and they're incredibly physically strong. And so when we go into their school, we have a really tough time. Even though we take them outside of the classroom, it's still their context, their environment. When they come on the residential with us, and all our residential trips are expedition-based, it's about a journey, they behave differently. The teachers say to us, it's incredible how well behaved the children are. You don't get the low-level disruption. You don't get as much of the violence. And it's about going back to an NLP presupposition that all behavior is contextual. People will behave differently in different situations. So if you change the environment, you take them out of school, you put them in the woods, the moors, the sea, they behave differently in a more positive way. And I've observed that. So the old hierarchical structure of, environment won't change behavior, I dispute that, absolutely. And linking into to logical levels. NLP works at each of these levels in outdoor education. From the highest level, the sense of purpose, which very difficult to define. But to me, if I can tell you a story, I've just spent the past Wednesday and Thursday up on Dartmoor with a group of children. And we were sat up on top of a tor, which we just worked really hard to get to the top of. They had heavy bags, and it's still really wet and boggy up. It's always wet and boggy up on Dartmoor, even when the sun's shining. And they worked really hard to get up the top, and they were exhausted and tired. And they were year 4, so they'd only just come from sort of, year 3. So they're quite young, and they got to the top, and we're all sat at the top, and they're exhausted. And you're just looking out over Dartmoor, and it's just stunning views all the way down to the sea. And one of these children just went, that's awesome. Just talking about the view. Now, children aren't renowned for appreciating views. Yeah? My children are. I've dragged them up to the top of enough mountains for them to go, shuffle back down again. But you just get these moments of this child felt connected to nature. They felt that they were part of something that's bigger, necessarily. And in outdoor education terms, you call that letting the mountains speak for themselves. You just put them somewhere and they have an experience and it means something to them. That's not the time to start unpicking and reflecting. You just let that happen and you hear and you observe. And it's great when you get that. All the way through, from at the bottom of the hierarchy, say, the environmental level, we teach them about flora and fauna and nature and sustainability through bushcraft, about living in an environment and surviving in it. But they also learn to, who do I work well with? Where do I work well? And so they can learn from that. So everything we do, we can affect change or learning and then change at every level. I'm not, and the outdoor education world is possibly unique in this, because I believe that the indoor classroom is great for the more academically inclined pupils. If you're not, then you struggle. They get bored. I'm going to move on now to some specifics, and I'm going to present some sort of areas or scenarios where I apply the techniques. Because picking up on Martin's point about pragmatism, I am a real pragmatist. The theory, the concepts, the knowledge is great. But if you can't make it work for you, there's no point really, it's just knowledge then. So one of the first areas that I do it, use NLP, is in group management. You've got a group, be it adults or children, and I go through a sensory acuity process, which I call checking in. And so, beginning of a day, you stand there, normally early morning, it's normally wet, and you ask them, what are you thinking, what are you feeling, and what's your body state? Sort of responses you get back is, don't know, quite often, because they don't know. They're not aware of what they're thinking. But then you sort of encourage them to bring their unconscious thoughts into their conscious. And suddenly they'll say, oh, I'm a bit nervous, I'm a bit scared, I'm apprehensive, I'm excited. brilliant. You know. What are you feeling? You know, well, I feel sick. I didn't have any breakfast. And awareness is key. And then I ask about the body state. And you'll get things like, oh, I'm tired, or my boots don't fit. Right, we're about to go on a 10-mile walk and you've already got a blister. But you can do something about it at that stage. You know. The other thing I find about, and then what I do is, a mile into the walk, we'll stop again, we'll sit down, take on some water, and we'll check in again. You know, now how are you feeling? What are you thinking? What's your body state? And things with children especially, they don't know that they're getting cold or wet. You know, they just suddenly go, I think that you call it sort of fumbling, stumbling, and then mumbling, you know. You don't want to get to mumbling, that's a bad day, you know, that's air ambulances and, you know, paperwork, it's awful. So what I do is I help them to become more aware of how they're feeling and their body state, so they can then take steps to manage it. And with younger children, they find it difficult. You know, and I try not to, if you say put a jumper on, that's an intervention at the behavioural level. You know, you need to give them awareness they can manage their own state. And there's the expression again about, nature doesn't care if you're wet, if you're cold, or if you're tired. You know, it won't help. And it's all about and we spend a lot of time giving them personal responsibility for their actions and their choices to manage their own welfare. You know? Bit of tough love, I suppose. You know, it's the old days of outward bound. You know? So that's first example. Moving on from group management to a more individual level, I want to look at anchoring as a method of state management. It's not a great picture, but this is an abseil that we do off a viaduct up on Dartmoor. It's a long way. Okay? Now, the worst thing about this abseil is that you have to climb over this railing. You know, we hook them onto a thing called a cow's tail first, and then you have to climb. And I've done this because a colleague of mine was setting it up. I thought I was just looking after the group. And he said, oh, Nick, you'll demonstrate, won't you? You know? So I'm trying to anchor calm, quite successful. But you've got to climb over the railing. And the other thing about this abseil is one of you sets it up and you just put anchor points, actual physical rope anchor points into the stonework. And the group are there watching this going on, and they've got just enough time to get nervous as they're watching this happen. So what I do is anchoring, and I'll do a group anchor for them. So whilst the abseil's going on, being set up, I do a bit of distraction. And I'll do check-in first, What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's your body state? And so I get an awareness of the anxiety levels amongst the group. Sometimes it's obvious because someone's sobbing. Sometimes not, A lot of people internalize how they're feeling. And then what I do is I say, would it help if I gave you a way of feeling calm and confident and brave? And they go, yeah, it'd be great, Nick, you can do that. And I say, well, just imagine and think about a time when you were calm or confident or brave. And they all sit there and eyes roll back in their heads and close their eyes. And then I remember and then I say, okay, well, just, turn the volume up on that feeling and then, squeeze your fingers together. So we do a very quick anchor. I got it wrong when I first did this because what I said, I was looking at the submodality of those feelings or of the, the visual or the auditory and the kinesthetic. And I said, and then reach out and turn up the volume on that feeling. And they all looked at me like, what? Anyone under 30 has never turned anything up with a dial. So I went, well, imagine you've got the remote control and you're doing it. And suddenly they went, oh, I got it now. Which really made me think about the appropriateness of the analogies metaphors that I use. And I've realised that I'm getting older, which was upsetting for me. So I was the one sobbing then. So we do this, and I'll talk about some limiting beliefs just in a minute, but that's the first thing that I do. Now, the limiting beliefs that we hear, just before, there's a few here. I can't do it, I'm a failure, everybody hates me, I'm scared, I'm no good at climbing. And if you think about those logical levels, I'm no good at climbing, that's kind of an environmental thing. I'm good at other things, but I'm not good at climbing. Now, recently, there was a group doing a zip wire, which is quite a scary zip wire across a valley. And I just turned, and I got there, and there was a girl sat there, climbing helmet, harness on. And I just sit down beside her. And she said, I'm never ever going to do it. I was like, oh, all right, I didn't say anything. said, I know what you're going to try and make me do. I said, I'm not. I'm just interested why you're sat here and you're not doing it. And so she said, I'm never, ever going to do it. Now, in NLP terms, they say that you should calibrate on behavior. Yeah? And I'm looking, and she's wearing a helmet, and she's wearing a harness. You know? So at some point, somewhere in her head, she has thought, I might do this. So I'm thinking there's a chance. So I thought, I can work with this. So what I did, I said, okay, well, that's interesting. You know, why is it that you're never, ever going to do this? She said, because I'm scared. Now, scared is a real abstract concept, isn't it? You know, you can't pin it down to anything. So I used meta-model questioning. I said, what specifically are you scared of? And she said, I'm scared of heights. Okay. What is it about heights that you're specifically scared of? Falling. Okay, that's reasonable. Why is it that you think you're going to fall? Well, I'm worried the rope might break. And suddenly I've got something that I can work with. And I said, well, you see that rope? That's strong enough to hold the whole weight of the coach that you came in with everyone in it. Are you heavier than that coach? No, I'm not. Okay. And you see, there's two of those ropes. And then suddenly she sort of, she can rationalize that. And in a digital, auditory, digital, rational, logical sense type way, you go, oh, okay, well, I feel a bit better about this. And I sort of left her with it and went away, and the other instructor took over, came back, and she was down the bottom of the zip wire having done it. Now, maybe it was me. Maybe it's what I did. Maybe it was the intervention. Yeah. But when I sat there, she was crying, and she wasn't going to do it. You know? And I find that chunking down, they call it, from I'm scared to I'm scared of the rope snapping. Yeah. And that's where meta-model questioning comes in. The other thing that I do is the more Milton model, the abstract language, where at the beginning I'll say, I'll introduce, I'll brief the activity, and I'll say, just imagine how great you're going to feel once you've completed the abseil. And just think about what it's going to sound like when you tell your parents and your friends how brave you were once you've done it. So I'm sort of, there's lots of embedded commands flying in there, it's all that look into my eyes, don't look around my eyes, sort of stuff. But a combination of that Milton model language to work on the group, anchoring with individuals and the group, and then the meta-model questioning to overcome any specific resistance. We get a pretty good rate of getting people through. What a lot of instructors I've heard, a child will say, I'm scared. They'll say, oh, don't be scared, go on. No, that's not going to help. I have heard stories in the olden days, of sort of, instructors who had a 100% success rate with abseils, and they'd be just stamping on the fingers of the child. I don't advise that. Okay. Conflict resolution, Calvin and Hobbes. And I use three things in conflict resolution. We get a lot of this, especially with this special school. Fighting violence to the low level, he said, she said type stuff. Transactional analysis, the parent-adult child ego states. Now, as outdoor educators, we in terms of transactional analysis, we don't, as the instructors, we don't get involved in the controlling parent, the discipline side of things, or the nurturing, parent side of things. If a child is homesick, we let the teachers solve that. If there's a fight or a dispute, we let the teachers do that. Because that then enables us to not take on those two roles, so the child is less likely to go into the child state. So we're trying to keep ourselves at adult, which is more likely to bring the child to adult, so you can reason and make sense of. Perceptual positions, once the dispute has been resolved, or they've been broken up, we can then go in, and a lot of these techniques you do very quickly, and we just sit there on a couple of logs, 3 logs normally. What are you thinking and feeling about what happened? And I'll move them to the next log. What do you think Jimmy's feeling about you smacking him in the face like that? Probably sad, and then we move them to the third position, and what if someone just walked in on that? What would they think? And it's just such a powerful tool for developing empathy and understanding of other situations. And then anchoring again is, well, next time you find yourself in that position and he's winding you up, just go back to your calm place, and set them a calm anchor. And the feedback that I get from the pupils and the teachers is really positive that this does actually work. And I'm sure it'll work for you if you were to try it. Developing understanding, metaphor. You know, it's so powerful. The whole thing, the whole outdoor experience is a metaphor. Climbing mountains, overcoming personal challenges to get to the top. You know, journeying, you know, starting at point A, going to point B and having to, you know, solve things as you go. It's one big metaphor. But also when you're sat around the campfire at night, there's something hardwired in the human brain to want to look at campfires. You know, just looking at all the flickering flames and the colours of the orange in there. You know, I spend a lot of time around campfires and I can never tire of it. And I think that campfire scenario induces a trance-like state. You know, trance-like, not being sort of, you know, completely zoned out, but just being receptive to learning. And that's where we do storytelling activities. As instructors, we will, you know, tell the story of the day, the big story, but then within the big story, there's individual stories of when little Jimmy, you know, was scared and got over that little bit of the climb that he didn't think he'd do, or when somebody went in a canoe for the first time when they were scared. So you've got the big metaphor, and then within that, you've got all these little metaphors running. And then I also get the children to tell their story. You know, what did you feel about what happened today? I could talk for hours about metaphor, but I haven't got the time, unfortunately. The final thing that I do is we go into schools, which is where we're different to a lot of providers, and we run a day in their context, in their environment. And I often say to the children, you know, when you came to my environment, the woods or the moor or the sea, you felt uncomfortable, you're outside of your comfort zone. When I go into schools and I'm sat on these tiny little